Okay, so here's another interesting Pokemon theory. In the original prototype, Bulbasaur was just a grass type. It wasn't a grass and a poison type until it evolved into Ivysaur. But here's something interesting else to think about. I think I know why. Because you could encounter Pidgeys at the very beginning of the game and they would use Gust. Now, Gust in the prototype was actually a flying type move rather than a normal type, and I think I know exactly why they changed it. Because it would have been a times 4 on Bulbasaur. And if you think about it, that would have meant that it would contradict the game's, so called difficulty based on the Pokemon you choose. It would be based on. Because Pidgey is, it's a normal and a flying type. But in this case, it would have been a bird type and a flying type. Or no, maybe it was a bird and a normal type, which is weird because bird type was basically flying type. I guess what happened was they decided that it was supposed to be like you could still be a bird, but like a bird that doesn't fly. Like for example, like a penguin. But the funny thing is though, Pidgey can fly because it's got feathers. So that would contradict that in this case, but we've already talked about that. So, but anyways, but Bulbasaur is technically supposed to be the easiest of the three starters to raise because it's a plant, evolves early, and it levels up faster, up to a certain point. So it would have been a good choice for a beginner. Now, but even if you chose Charmander wouldn't really be that difficult. I mean, there's Pokemon you can catch that can help you out too. But anyways, being that Pokemon encourages you to explore and whatnot. But what's really interesting is if you really take a really good look at the prototype data, that would explain why Bulbasaur was not. That's why they changed those moves. Flying type, Gust was moved to a normal type because Pidgey still would have got stab bonuses because it's a normal and a flying type. And that would also explain why Bulbasaur was didn't change to why they did change it back to a poison and a grass type in the final version was because that's what Bulbasaur was. And it's poison tree frog. And it still would have been like times one damage towards it. Because it's not fly. Because normal type moves are not super effective against grass or poison types, which is actually very interesting. It's worth interesting that I'm trying to think. Was Squirtle supposed to be a fighting type? Was it just a water type? I got to double check its types, but I know once it evolved into, I think War Turtle was a fighting type, wasn't it? Like in the prototype, believe it or not, there's a lot of stuff they changed. Like no joke, it's so if I'm saying stuff you probably don't know about, this is actually very interesting. I know Blastoise and Blastoise was in fact a water and a water and a ground type. I was gonna say brown type, but it's like no ground type. but um, but it's interesting though. So there were a lot of types that were changed, whether due to balancing or maybe contradictions between the balancing of how many Pokemon they had at the time, cartridge limitations. But it would have been interesting. That does explain why Swampert was eventually the water and the ground type after they had settled on that. Once Mudkip evolved into Marsh Top. Yeah, Marsh Top. It was now a water and a ground type. Even though it's kind of funny how Mudkip wasn't a ground type or a water type, even though you ran in. I do believe it was because of balancing issues at the beginning of the game because you could run into Shroomishes and they knew Absorb, so it wouldn't be difficult to start out with Mudkip in Gen 3. But yeah, but it's interesting though how certain Pokemon types were changed and certain move types were changed to sort of counter out the balancing of what Pokemon you would possibly run into, and over time what they could do with that, which is interesting because the legendary birds even had that problem, but they were strong Pokemon. So in order to severely weaken them, they were encouraged that you fight them with certain types, right? And that's what Pokemon is you're supposed to figure out the typing advantages and what moves to work against which Pokemon, and then you win. So that's how that usually works out. How strong the moves are and the Pokemon themselves and their base stats and whatnot.